The 1960 Cadillacs were the last of their generation before the vehicles would be reintroduced and all new for the 1961 model year. And what we're going to take a look at today is this beautiful 1960 Cadillac Fleetwood 60 Special, the top-of-the-line vehicle, the four-door hardtop that you can see here. And I've called it a Persian beauty because this particular vehicle is finished in a color called Persian Sand. And why Persian Sand is kind of pinkish, mauvish, purpley, I don't know, but that is the name of the color. Now, as I mentioned, this was the last model year for this particular generation Cadillac, and the 1960s had some pretty significant revisions from the 1959 model year. But let's talk a little bit about the history of the 1959 Cadillacs and how they came to be. Because without the 1959, there would have been no 1960 model year Cadillac. It's important to understand the genesis of the original design before it was revised for the 1960 model year. Now, for those who are car aficionados, you'll know that the 1959 Cadillacs really were the supreme development of the fin over at the General Motors School of Design. And the important thing to note is that the 1959 Cadillacs never would have happened if it weren't for the 1957 Chrysler products that came out in that model year. And what do I mean? Well, those forward-look Chryslers were vehicles that were just so strikingly beautiful that General Motors designers, when they saw them, and they saw them when they were first being produced down on the Mound Road facility in Detroit, Michigan, they were being parked in the lot as they were getting ready for shipment. Some General Motors designers went down there and saw them through the fence and thought that their 1959 proposals that they were working on were absolutely doomed, given how great the 57 Chryslers looked. Now, of course, when these 57 Chryslers are being produced kind of in the summer of 1956, it's too late for General Motors to redesign its 1957s or 58 model year cars because it takes about 3 years to really bring a car through to fruition. So the designers kind of said that for 1959, they were going to go their own way and depart from design bosses Harley Earl's styling philosophy. And they redid all the vehicles while he was away in Europe to a more leaner look. And Cadillac had to go with that huge fin because designers knew that Chryslers were going to have huge fins. And it really didn't matter if you're getting a Plymouth Fury or a DeSoto, Firedome, Fireflight, whatever it might have been, or an Imperial. Many of the Chryslers for that 1957 model year had very tall fins. And these light roof designs, they were just beautifully tailored as opposed to General Motors cars like the 1958s. They look kind of chubby and bulbous, including the Cadillac, by the way, although the Cadillac's one of my favorites for GM in 1958. In any case, that was what birthed the 1959 Cadillac, and once designers really got that huge fin out of their system, they revised the car for 1960 to have a more tailored look and a lighter look than what the 1959s had. And as you can see in this particular photo, the fins have been toned down pretty significantly for the 1960 model year. And you can also tell that this particular car espouses that then new design philosophy of lower, longer, wider. This certainly was a low car. If you've ever sat in one of these 1959 to 1960 Cadillacs, you'll notice that you almost kind of sit on the floor in a legs out position. And that's because the cars are so low to the ground. And they're also very wide, and they just have a very different presence from the vehicles. Think about this and compare it and contrast it to an early 50s Cadillac. The styling philosophy is just completely different. But I do love a number of things about the 1960 design, including the toned down fin. I think that the overall sculpture is just better, and this side view is certainly a dramatic side view with that diving line that starts up near the front window. It actually begins with the fender, and it kind of twists and turns as it heads rearward. And the fin starts actually all the way up near the front windshield and just continues to build as that surface moves rearward. Now, the other thing that you'll notice here is while the car is low, the windshield is very tall, and these cars did have a great amount of visibility when you were sitting in the front seats. Now, in fact, the visibility was so great, particularly with the windshield and the backlight and the lack of the B-pillars, that some of these cars didn't come standard with outside rearview mirrors at all. In fact, my 1959 Pontiac doesn't have an outside rearview mirror on the passenger side or the driver's side, which really takes a little bit of getting used to. But once you've driven the car for a few miles, you get used to it because all you have to do is turn your head and you really do have unencumbered view off to the side. But that's something that you can't do in modern cars today with the super thick and chunky A pillars, B pillars, C pillars, etc. It's just not something that is really possible anymore given the designs of modern vehicles. Let's go back to the front of the car and take one last look at this because there's some significant differences from the 59, even though it looks the same. Of course, the hood is an example and the fenders are the same, but the lights and the bumper and the grille, including the texture, are different. The grille now spills out much more underneath the lights. There's not that bisecting bumper or that upper and lower section to the grille. It's just now all one piece with one texture. And the bumper is different as well. It's not as bulbous. The turn signals are kind of inset within the bumper, although they were in 59. But the bumper itself is much more trim and tailored. So designers were able to make, I think, some pretty significant and I think they really were improvements for 1960 over 1959. As we turn around to the rear of the car, we'll notice those fins that I was mentioning before. And one of the things that I love about these fins is just how delicate they look. Notice how the taillight is integrated into the fin and how thin that overall fin is. Of course, it's trimmed by the bright work on the top of the fin, which conceals the seam in between the outer portion of the sheet metal that faces outward as well as the portion that faces inward toward the deck lid. You'll notice that underneath the deck lid, you have that texture that's the same as the grille that's repeated in the back, tying the front together with the back. And unlike what you would see for 1961, you have another set of lights that are inset in the bumper. In 1961, those lights would be rotated 90 degrees. They'd be horizontal. Here, they are perfectly vertical, aligned with the tail lamp. And here we have the dead-on rear view. And one of the things that many people don't know about Cadillacs of this era and all the way up until really the modern era is that the fins were always perfectly vertical on Cadillacs. They were never canted. You did perhaps have, like the 1961, you had these skegs that created fins on the lower portion of the body, but the uppermost fins were always vertical, and the tail lamps were vertical on Cadillacs. That was a light signature that Cadillac had owned all the way back to the 1948 model year, and something that continues through to this day. But for whatever reason, it was sacrilege to kind of cant the fins or cant the tail lamps on Cadillacs. They always had to be perfectly vertical, couldn't be tipped in or tipped out. And it's amazing because I like the look, but especially in this view with the tall rear window, it makes the car look a little bit narrow. But oh well, the car was wide enough that it could certainly take that look. Now, one of the things that was great about the Cadillacs of the 1960 model year is that not only were the exteriors just sublimely styled, but so were the interiors. Take a look at this beautiful cloth and leather interior on this 1960 Fleetwood. It's just spectacular. I love the buttons and the seat stitching, as well as the big fat center armrest there for the ultimate in comfort. Of course, because it was a Cadillac, not only did you get that big fat center armrest, but you also got full width armrests on the door panels as well. And the instrument cluster on this, I think, is, I would say not overly complicated, but very tasteful and very simple at the same time. And it conveys all the relevant information. This car is an air conditioning equipped car, as you can see by the vents that are included in the IP. And during this time frame, it's interesting, the HVAC systems, the air conditioning really operated separately from the heater. And the Cadillacs had different air conditioning and heat controls on either side of the steering wheel, in part for that reason. But they hadn't quite developed yet that system where you had the blend door, where the air would blow over the heater core and the evaporator. It would either blow over the evaporator or over the heater core, not both. And so that was something that would come a little bit later, and the coolant flow into the heater core on these was really dictated by when you move the heat lever, it would allow more antifreeze into the heater core. So the further you move the temperature slider to the warmer setting, the more coolant flow that went through the heater core, the better heat that you would have, as opposed to what you have in modern cars. which would come a little bit later, would be that blend door where you're mixing in the outside air and the heated air that goes over the heater core. Well, that philosophy and that HVAC setup would come a little bit later, but this car does have frigid air conditioning with the GM A6 compressor. And notice in this view, what's on top of the dash there, right in the middle, that is the automatic headlamp dimming system. So these cars were quite sophisticated for their time. Many people don't know that cars, well, not quite of this era, they didn't have automatic climate control yet. Cadillac would introduce that in 1964 and have a one-year exclusive on it before other General Motors divisions could pick it up for 1965. Ford would take until 1966 to introduce automatic climate control. But you did have quite a few modern conveniences. You obviously have the power windows, and you had great heat and air conditioning, power steering, power brakes. But even on cars like the Eldorado Brougham from a few years prior, you even had memory power seats, amazingly. Of course, all of this was done mechanically back then. There were no computers. So imagine doing things like automatic climate control or memory power seats absent a computer. It's pretty amazing that engineers were able to come up with these things. And of course, they evolved, and now every car seemingly has automatic climate control because it's a relatively simple setup. But back in this day, to engineer something that was a pure mechanical system is pretty gosh darn impressive. Now, under hood in your Cadillac for 1959, you had a 390 cubic inch V8 engine topped by a 4-barrel carburetor in this Fleetwood 60 Special, made 325 gross horsepower, and it was paired with a 4-speed hydromatic transmission. Yes, that's right. GM had a 4-speed automatic transmission during this time frame. Very short first gear on these to get yourself moving quite well, and then it's an interesting transmission. The 2 to 3 shift in particular is one where it's not only upshifting to a higher gear, but also going into a lockup mode. So the RPMs really drop off in the 2 to 3 shift. And for those of you who haven't watched my prior video where I explain this, my best kind of explanation of how the engine sounds when you're taking off normally on this car and shifting through the gears is something like this. So there you go. If you have one of these cars with a 4-speed hydromatic, let me know how I did on my sound effects. But those 4-speed hydromatics were pretty bulletproof. They were used in World War II and really perfected during that time frame in tanks and other things. So they were great. I have to say that I do like the turbo hydromatics that came after them better because while they are 3 speeds, they are smoother. And you have a torque converter, so you get torque multiplication. The original hydromatic just had a fluid coupling, so you don't have that torque multiplication like the turbo hydromatics do. And that's one of the reasons why the 4-speed hydromatics have such a short first gear is to really get you going because there isn't that torque multiplication effect that the later transmissions had. In any case, this 390 was basically the same, as I mentioned, from 1959. It was a great engine for Cadillac, and Cadillac had come out with its first overhead valve V8 engine in 1949. And this was really just a continuation of that engine. Very smooth, relatively peppy. In some Eldorado trim vehicles, you could get it topped by 3 2-barrel carburetors, so you get a little bit more power. But here, with the 4-barrel carburetor, it certainly propelled these 1960 Cadillacs along quite well. So what do you think of the 1960 Cadillac Fleetwood? This Persian beauty, as I called it. I love the color, the interior and the exterior color combination on this particular car. I think it just really sets the car off well and gives it something special. It's a special car in any case, but just made more special by a very rare, unique color combination. Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.